Maid found a woman bleeding in the apartment. The Mafia boss burst in. "Don't let my mother die." The smell of the Romano building was the first thing that hit you. It was not a smell, really, but the absence of one. It was the scent of money, of air so thoroughly filtered and scrubbed that it felt sterile, thin in the lungs, in the lobby. It was cut with the faint, expensive perfume of fresh lilies, changed twice a day. On the upper floors, where Grace Moretti worked, it was just the faint, chemical tang of her own high-end cleaning supplies. Grace, at 24, felt older than the polished marble she scrubbed. She was a ghost in this building, and she preferred it that way, in a world of gleaming glass towers and men in suits that cost more than her yearly rent. Invisibility was a survival tactic. She wore a plain gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her sneakers silent on the plush carpets. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, her earbuds playing a tinny podcast to block out the quiet hum of immense wealth. She worked for a high-end service contracted by the Romano family, the enigmatic owners of this Westbridge skyscraper and, according to rumor, half the city. The Romanos were a whisper, a name on a plaque, a shadow that fell over everything. Grace's assignment was the top floor, the penthouse. It was a strange job. The penthouse was massive, taking up the entire floor, with views that stretched from the city's steel heart to the distant, gray line of the ocean. But it was empty, or, supposedly, near empty. The supervisor, a sharp-faced woman named Maria, had given Grace the rules on her first day. "You clean the main foyer, the grand salon, the kitchen, and the guest wing," Maria had said, her voice sharp. "You dust everything, you polish the floors, you make it look like a photograph. You do not touch the east wing. You do not go near the master suite. The doors are locked for a reason. We are paid because we do not ask questions. You understand?" Grace understood. Questions got you noticed. Noticed you got fired, and Grace could not, under any circumstances, get fired. Every cent she earned, minus her meager living expenses, went back home. It went to a small, run-down apartment 2 states over, where her younger brother, Leo, lived with a part-time caregiver. Leo, who had been born with bones a little too brittle for the world, needed medications she couldn't pronounce, and physical therapy that cost a fortune. Grace's meager paycheck was his lifeline, so she kept her head down. She ignored the breathtaking art on the walls, the silk rugs, the sheer, impossible opulence. It was all just scenery in the long, quiet hallway of her day. The rumor among the staff was that a reclusive old woman lived in the locked-off master suite. Some said she was an invalid. Some said she was the family matriarch, hidden away. Grace didn't care. She just wanted to finish her shift, microwave her dinner, call Leo, and sleep. Today was a Tuesday. The air was heavy, promising a storm. Grace was running her buffer over the expanse of white marble in the grand salon, watching the machine's reflection glide across the surface. When she heard it, it was not a crash, it was not a scream, it was a groan, a low, liquid sound of pain that cut through the silence of the penthouse. Grace froze. The buffer hummed, oblivious. She shut it off. The silence that rushed back in was absolute, heavier than before. She stood perfectly still, her heart a sudden, cold knot in her chest. It came again. From the east wing. From the locked, forbidden part of the apartment. "Don't get involved. Don't get involved. Don't get involved." The words were a prayer. Her supervisor's warning, a siren in her head. She should pack her cart, leave the floor, and tell no one. But the groan became a faint whimper. It was the sound of someone trying and failing to be quiet. It was a sound of absolute, helpless agony. Grace looked at the polished floor. She thought of Leo, of how he sounded when his leg was broken, when he was trying to be brave for her. She was moving before she knew it. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound as she crossed the salon and stood before the double doors of the east wing. They were, as always, locked. But one of them was not quite shut. It was ajar, just a crack. Her hand trembled as she pushed it. "Hello?" she whispered. The air that came from the room was different. It was warm, stale, and metallic. It smelled like pennies. It smelled like blood. She pushed the door open. It was a bedroom, larger than her entire apartment, dominated by a heavy, dark wood bed, but the bed was empty. "Hello? Ma'am?" She took a step in, and then another, and then she saw her. On the floor, between the bed and a heavy dresser, lay an elderly woman. She was on her back, her thin white hair fanned out in a halo on the dark Persian rug. She wore a silk nightgown, a pale robin's egg blue that was now soaked dark red. Grace's breath caught in her throat. The woman was small, bird-like, her skin the color of old paper. A dark, ugly bruise was blooming on her cheek, and her lip was split. This was not a fall. This was violence. A deep, spreading pool of red was growing from her side, soaking into the priceless rug. Grace's body went cold, then hot. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. She fumbled for her phone. Who did she call? 911? The police? The image of Maria's face flashed in her mind. We are paid because we do not ask questions. Calling the police to the Romano penthouse? She would be fired before the first siren sounded. She would be blacklisted. She might as well pack her bags and live on the street. Leo, but the woman on the floor made a small, choking sound. Her eyes, a faded blue, fluttered open. They were unfocused, filled with pain. Grace couldn't run. She just couldn't. She hit the button for the building's internal security desk, the one meant for fires or elevator failures. A bored voice answered, "Security?" "Penthouse," Grace choked out, her voice a strained whisper. "Send help. Someone's hurt. Send a doctor. Now." She didn't wait for a reply. She threw the phone. The woman was bleeding too fast. "It's okay," Grace said, her voice shaking. "Help is coming. It's okay." She ran to the adjoining bathroom, a cavern of more marble and gold. She grabbed a stack of thick, white bath towels. She skidded back to the woman's side and dropped to her knees. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. "I'm sorry. This is going to hurt." She wadded up one towel and pressed it gently against the wound at the woman's side. The woman let out a sharp, breathless gasp and her eyes flew open. Focusing on Grace for the first time, they were sharp, intelligent eyes, now wide with terror. "It's okay. I'm just trying to stop the—" Grace didn't get to finish. The front door of the penthouse burst open. It didn't just open, it exploded inward, slamming against the marble wall with a sound like a gunshot. Heavy. Pounding footsteps echoed from the foyer. Men's voices, sharp and low. Grace's blood turned to ice. This wasn't the building's medic. This was something else. Before she could even stand, he was there. He filled the doorway, a figure of impossible, dark authority. He was tall, in his late 30s, and wore a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. His dark hair was brushed back, his jawline sharp and unforgiving. He was, in a distant, terrifying way, handsome, but his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes, the color of steel, swept the room and landed on Grace. On her, kneeling over the bleeding woman, her hands covered in blood, two other men, massive in size, flanked him. They were guards, plain and simple, and their hands were inside their jackets. The man in the suit crossed the room in two long, silent strides. Grace flinched, pulling her hands back instinctively. His hand shot out and clamped around her upper arm. It was not a grab. It was a capture. His fingers were like steel bands, lifting her from the floor as if she weighed nothing. He hauled her close, his other hand coming up to grip her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "What did you do?" he snarled. The voice was a low vibration, a growl that seemed to come from his chest. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Grace was paralyzed. She smelled the expensive wool of his suit, the faint, clean scent of his cologne. It was intoxicating and terrifying. She tried to speak, but only a small, choked sound came out. His eyes were not just cold, they were dead. Empty of everything but a black, simmering rage. He shook her, a short, violent rattle. "Who are you? What did you do to her?" Grace's eyes streamed with tears of sheer terror. "Nothing. I found her. He was not listening. He was going to kill her. Right here. She knew it. He was going to snap her neck and leave her next to the old woman. Dante. The voice was a dry, reedy whisper from the floor. The man in the suit froze. His grip on Grace's arm and jaw did not lessen, but his entire massive frame went utterly still. "Dante," the old woman whispered again, her voice papery thin but laced with an undeniable authority. Slowly, as if moving against a great weight, the man turned his head. He looked down. The old woman's eyes were fixed on him. Cecilia Romano. "Let her go," Cecilia breathed, her hand, thin and pale, lifted a few inches from the floor, her index finger pointing at Grace. She helped. Her name is Grace. She helped. The change was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been thrown. He dropped Grace. She stumbled back, collapsing against the leg of the bed, her arm and jaw aching. The man didn't even look at her. He was on his knees in an instant, his movements fluid and precise, kneeling in the puddle of his mother's blood. The rage was gone, not vanished, but focused, channeled into something else. "Madre," he said, and his voice was completely different. It was still a growl, but the venom was gone, replaced by a raw, guttural note of fear. "Madre, I'm here. I'm here." He gently brushed the hair from his mother's face. His hands, which had been weapons a second before, were now impossibly tender. Cecilia's eyes closed, a faint sigh escaping her. Dante's head snapped up, his steel eyes finding Grace where she cowered. The coldness was back, but it was a different cold. It was the cold of a surgeon, not a killer. "My doctor is 5 minutes out," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Until he gets here. She does not die. Get over here." Grace stared, her body locked. "Now!" he roared. The word was a physical blow. Grace scrambled forward on her hands and knees. "The towels! Where you had them!" he commanded. "Press down. Hard." Grace, shaking so badly she could barely control her hands, took the blood-soaked towels and pressed them back onto the wound. Cecilia groaned, her back arching. "Do not stop," Dante ordered. He was kneeling opposite Grace, so close their knees were almost touching. He was a wall of black wool and contained violence. "You do not let up. You do not faint. You do not look away. You keep your hands there and you keep pressing. Do you understand me?" Grace couldn't find her voice. She just nodded, her eyes wide and locked on his. She pressed down, her knuckles white, her arms screaming. The penthouse was silent again, save for Cecilia's shallow breathing and the frantic pounding of Grace's heart. They were trapped in a horrific, intimate tableau, the boss, the maid, and the matriarch. Grace stared at the man, Dante. He was watching his mother, his jaw tight, his broad shoulders tensed. He was covered in his mother's blood, his $1,000 suit ruined, and he did not seem to care. He looked at Grace. He was assessing her, his gaze sweeping over her face. He had expected hysteria, a sobbing, useless girl. He saw her terror, her shaking hands, the tears staining her cheeks, but he also saw that her hands had not moved. Her pressure was steady. Her jaw was set, a mirror of his own. In the midst of her terror, he saw a core of something hard. He saw fire. Grace looked back. Unable to break the gaze, she was looking at the most dangerous man she had in her life, a killer, a monster. But as he knelt there, his focus entirely on the dying woman at their feet, his own hand hovering over his mother's as if to shield her, Grace saw something else. Beneath the steel, beneath the rage, she saw a crack, a small, hairline fracture of vulnerability. It was the raw, primal fear of a child about to lose his mother. It was the same fear she felt every day for Leo. It was the one human thing she had seen since she walked into the building. The air thrummed, thick with the smell of blood and the unspoken, terrible power of the man kneeling inches away. The quiet hum of the building's filtered air was the only sound. There were no sirens, there would be no police. Grace Moretti was alone, her hands literally holding the life of the Romano matriarch, under the watchful, lethal gaze of her son. Her old life was over. She just didn't know it yet. The 5 minutes he had promised felt like 5 hours. Grace's arms had gone from burning to numb, her shoulders locked in a state of rigid agony. She had not looked away from Dante's face, not once. They just knelt there, a silent, unholy trinity, bound by the rhythm of Cecilia's faint breathing. The arrival of the doctor was quiet, a swift intrusion. He was a small, older man in a rumpled suit, carrying a black leather bag. He looked like a weary accountant, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He didn't speak to Dante, just knelt beside him, his presence immediately taking charge. "Move," he said to Grace. It was not unkind, just efficient. Grace tried to pull her hands back, but they were stuck. Tacky with drying blood, her fingers cramped into claws. She had to peel them away, a thick, tearing sound that made her stomach heave. She stumbled backward, landing on the floor, her legs refusing to hold her. Dante was already speaking to the doctor in a low, rapid-fire Italian, his voice a guttural scrape. The doctor responded in clipped, calm English. "The pressure was good. You, girl?" Grace flinched, her eyes snapping to him. "You're done here. Get out." Dante's head lifted. He had not looked at her since the doctor arrived. His face was granite, unreadable. He just watched her, his steel gaze following as she struggled to her feet. Her gray uniform was ruined, stained dark and stiff. She felt dizzy, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a hollow, shaking emptiness. One of the massive guards who had been standing silently by the door stepped forward, his hand gesturing firmly toward the exit. "Wait," Dante said. The words stopped her cold. The guard froze. Dante didn't turn. He was still watching his mother, but Grace knew the command was for her. He said something else in Italian. The guard took a step back. "Don't leave the building," Dante said, his voice flat. He finally looked at her, his eyes pinning her to the spot. "Go to the staff locker room. Wait. Someone will come for you." He didn't ask. He commanded. Grace just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She backed out of the room, her sneakers squeaking in the blood, a sound that would haunt her. She fled. She ran through the silent, opulent foyer, past the priceless art, and scrambled into the service elevator, her bloody hands leaving smears on the stainless steel button. She didn't just wait in the locker room. She hid. She huddled in the corner of the gray, sterile room for what felt like an eternity, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scrubbed her hands in the industrial sink until her skin was raw, watching the pink-tinged water spiral down the drain, but she could still smell it, the metallic, coppery tang of pennies. Hours passed, her shift ended. Other maids came and went, their voices a low buzz as they traded gossip, none of them looking at her. She was a pariah, marked. Finally, when the locker room was empty and the dim emergency lights had clicked on, the door opened. It was not one of Dante's men. It was her supervisor, Maria. Her face was pale, her lips a thin, white line. "Moretti, you're to come with me." Grace followed her, her body numb, her mind a blank slate of terror. She was going to be fired, or worse. They walked in silence, not to the service elevator, but to the main bank. Maria used a key card, and the elevator opened. She pressed the button for the garage. "Where are we going?" Grace whispered. "You're being summoned," Maria said, refusing to meet her eyes. "A car is waiting." The car was a black sedan, the windows so tinted they looked like polished obsidian. A man held the door open. Grace got in. The interior was silent, smelling of new leather and old money. She sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. They didn't drive far. They drove to a different tower, a sleek, black glass monolith that stabbed the night sky. They took a private elevator straight to an office that was larger than the penthouse. The entire back wall was a sheet of glass, the city of Westbridge glittering below like a carpet of scattered jewels. Dante Romano was not there. The office was dark, save for the city lights and a single desk lamp that illuminated a small, clear area on a massive, uncluttered mahogany desk. A man sat behind it. He was older than Dante, thinner, with a face like a hawk and eyes that were just as sharp. He wore a suit that was even more expensive, and he was smiling, a thin, reptilian smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Miss Moretti," he said. His voice was smooth, like oiled silk. "I am Mr. Vescovi. I handle Mr. Romano's administrative affairs. Please sit." The chair was a mile from the desk. Grace sat, her spine rigid. "We've reviewed the security footage from the penthouse," Vescovi said, steepling his fingers. "The cameras in the common areas, of course. We respect the family's privacy in their personal suites. The footage confirms your timeline. You entered, you cleaned. You were seen in distress, making a call. You were, in fact, nowhere near the master suite when the incident must have occurred." Grace felt a small, dizzying wave of relief, so strong it almost buckled her. "You are, for the purposes of our records, cleared of any wrongdoing," Vescovi continued. "Thank God," Grace breathed. "Can I go home?" Vescovi's smile tightened. "In a moment. Mr. Romano had a question. He's occupied with his mother. She is stable, thanks in no small part to your timely intervention. But he was curious. Why did you call security, and not the police?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. This was the real test. Grace looked at the floor, then back at Vescovi. She was too tired to lie, too scared to be clever. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what, my dear?" "Afraid of getting fired," Grace said, her voice small but clear. "You don't call the police on the Romano family. Not if you want to keep your job. Not if you're a maid." She swallowed, the honesty burning her throat. "But she was bleeding. She was just lying there. I couldn't just leave. I panicked. I called the first number I could think of that wasn't 911. Vescovi was silent for a long time. He studied her, his head tilted. The smile was gone. "I see." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a simple, white envelope. He slid it across the vast desk. "Mr. Romano wishes to express his gratitude for your service and your discretion." Grace stood on trembling legs and took it. It was thick with cash. "You will, of course, be taking some time off," Vescovi said, standing. It was a dismissal. "A week, paid. Do not concern yourself with your supervisor. We will handle the arrangements. A car is waiting to take you home." The ride to her apartment was as silent as the ride there. She lived in a rundown, brick tenement building in a part of the city that tourists and men like Dante Romano never saw. The driver, another stone-faced man, walked her to her door, a small, peeling paint square on the 4th floor. He waited until she had her key in the lock, then turned and left. Grace stumbled inside, locked the 3 deadbolts, and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. She was safe. She was home. She opened the envelope. Inside was $5,000. A choked sob escaped her. It was more money than she had seen in her life. It was 3 months of Leo's care. It was everything, and it was a warning. Gratitude, discretion, a payment for what she had done, a payment for her silence. She wrestled with fear all night, the wail of sirens outside her window a strange comfort after the sterile silence of the Romano building. She was out. She was clear. She had the money, but she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his eyes. Dante. The way he had looked at her, the way he had knelt in the blood, the flash of vulnerability, the immediate terrifying recovery. And she wondered why, if she was so clearly dismissed, she had the distinct chilling feeling of being watched. The next day, she saw him, the watcher. She was walking to the corner bodega to buy milk, her shoulders hunched, her hoodie pulled up. A man was leaning against the brick wall opposite her building. He wasn't one of the guards from the penthouse. He was younger, in jeans and a dark jacket, but he had the same stillness, the same air of purpose. He was smoking a cigarette, but his eyes were on her building, on her. He didn't follow her. He didn't move. He just watched. Grace's blood ran cold. She bought her milk, her hands shaking, and hurried back. Locking her bolts, she peered through her grimy window, and he was still there. She was a prisoner, not in his tower, but in her own home. Meanwhile, in a world she couldn't imagine, Dante Romano was hunting. His mother was in a secure, private hospital wing that was more fortress than clinic. She was stable, but the doctors had used the word brutal. The attack was personal. It was meant to be a message. Dante sat in a dark room, not his office, but a secure command center beneath the city, watching a bank of monitors. The footage from the penthouse was grainy, but it was clear. He watched the maid, Grace, enter. He watched her clean. He watched her stop, listen, and then, against all reason, approach the forbidden door. He watched her hesitate, then bolt for the bathroom, then kneel by his mother. He watched her terror when he arrived, but he also watched her hands, steady on the wound even as her body shook. She's telling the truth. His consigliere, Vescovi, said from the shadows. She's just a girl. Dante, nobody. A nobody who didn't run, Dante murmured, his voice rough. He rewound the footage. He watched himself grab her. He watched her face, the pure, unadulterated terror, and he watched the spark of defiance in her eyes just before his mother spoke. He felt a strange, unwelcome pull, a disturbance in his gut that had nothing to do with the hunt. She had seen him. Not the boss, not the myth, but the man. She had seen him scared. The attack was internal, Dante said, switching off the monitor. Someone on the inside, someone who knew my mother's routine, someone who had a key. Suspicion poisoned the air. It had to be someone close, someone in the family. He thought of the girl, Grace. The only person in that penthouse who was not a part of his world, the only one he knew, instinctively, was not lying. She was a fixed point, a piece of burning hot truth in a world of shadows. He found himself driving. He had no reason. He was supposed to be at the hospital, then at a meeting. But his driver took a different turn, a turn Dante had given him without thinking. He found himself on her street. He saw her through the window of the bodega. She was buying bread, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. She looked small, breakable. His man was across the street, unseen by her. Dante got out of the car. The air in the bodega was thick with the smell of cheap beer and stale sandwiches. Grace was at the counter, counting out change. Grace! She dropped the coins. They scattered on the dirty linoleum. She whirled, her eyes wide, her hand flying to her chest. He was standing there, by the rack of potato chips, a figure of impossible. Dark elegance in her world of cracked linoleum and fluorescent lights. He wore a simple, dark sweater and trousers, no suit, but he was just as intimidating. "Mr. Romano," she whispered. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. It was a lie, and they both knew it. "Checking on my interests." His eyes flickered to the man behind the counter, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. "You look tired." She didn't know what to say. You're following me. I'm protecting you," he corrected her. The arrogance was stunning. "Until I find the man who attacked my mother. Everyone in that building is a potential target, or a witness." "I didn't see anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I told you your man." "I know." He took a step closer. She could smell him again. That clean, expensive scent, so different from the musty air of the store. "Get your bread. I'll take you home." "I can walk. It's just across the street." "I'm not asking." The silence in the car was deafening. He didn't drive, he just sat, the engine a low, powerful thrum, and looked at her building. "This is where you live?" he asked. There was no judgment in his voice, just a flat observation. "Yes." He walked her to the door. This time, he didn't stop at the lobby. He walked her up the 4 flights of clattering, dimly lit stairs, his large frame making the narrow stairwell feel even smaller. He waited as she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the lock. His hand covered hers. His skin was warm, his hand large and rough, calloused. It completely enveloped hers. Grace's breath hitched. He was not gentle. He was simply there, an unmovable fact. He guided the key into the lock and turned it. He pushed the door open for her, into her tiny, one-room apartment. It was clean, but it was poor. A single bed, a tiny kitchenette, a threadbare armchair. Her whole life in one small, cramped space. She stepped inside, expecting him to leave. He followed her. He closed the door, and the sound of the locks clicking into place was unnervingly loud. He was inside. The room, already small, shrank to nothing. He was a lion in a cage, and it was her cage. "You can't be here," Grace said, finding her voice. It came out stronger than she expected. "I'm here," he said, turning. A charged, dangerous energy filled the room. This was not the sterile office. This was not the chaotic penthouse. This was her home, and he had invaded it. You think you can do just what? She challenged him, anger suddenly cutting through her fear. You think you can just show up, follow me, come into my home, you paid me. I'm out, I'm done. He walked toward her, slowly. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. She was an inch from the wall, trapped. You think that money made you done? He asked, his voice a low rumble. You were never done. You were done the moment you pushed open that door, the moment you put your hands on my mother. You're in, Grace. Whether you like it or not. I am not one of your things, she shot back, her body trembling but her eyes flashing. I am not one of your guards. I'm a maid. I needed a job. That's all. You were, he corrected her. A maid? His eyes dropped to her lips. The air was gone, sucked from the room. Grace's heart was not hammering. It had stopped. You're brave, he murmured, almost to himself. Stupid. But brave. You looked at me in that room. You didn't scream. You just looked. He lifted his hand. Grace flinched, but he was slow. He didn't touch her. Not yet. His fingers, those rough, calloused fingers, hovered near her face. I scare you, he stated. Yes, she whispered, her voice raw. You should be, he said. His hand finally moved, his thumb, warm and slightly rough, brushed the line of her jaw, the same jaw he had gripped in violence. Now, the touch was so light it was barely there, but it sent a jolt of pure, electric fire through her. He stepped closer. His body was not touching hers, but she could feel the heat radiating from him. He smelled like power. He cupped her face. His other hand rested on the wall just beside her head, caging her. His eyes were not cold steel now. They were dark, molten. He was looking at her like she was the only thing in the room, like she was something he hadn't known he was looking for. The way you looked at me, he whispered, his voice thick. No one looks at me like that. His head lowered. His lips were an inch from hers. She could feel his breath, warm and clean. She should have been terrified. But she was also something else. She was breathless, rooted, waiting. She closed her eyes. He didn't kiss her. He froze. His entire body became rigid. He pulled back, a sharp, sudden movement, as if he'd been burned. His hand dropped from her face, but he left his other hand on the wall, holding himself back. He turned his head, his jaw clenching, and let out a long, slow breath. He looked back at her. His eyes were shuttered again. The mask was back, the moment gone. I don't touch people I can't protect, he said. His voice was hard, guttural. He pushed himself off the wall. Lock your doors. Don't go out. My man will be outside. He'll get you anything you need. He was at the door, his hand on the knob. What do you want from me? Grace cried out, the words torn from her. He stopped, his back to her. He was silent for a long moment. I don't know, he said. And the admission sounded like it cost him. Then he was gone. Grace slid down the wall, her legs finally giving out. She sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, her body thrumming with a terrifying, confusing energy. She was breathless. She was confused. She brought her fingers to her jaw, where his thumb had been. She was completely, totally, and hopelessly entangled. The week of her suspension was a week of suffocating silence. The man outside her building became a permanent fixture, a silent, unmoving sentinel. Another man replaced him every 8 hours, just as silent, just as still. Grace's apartment, once her only sanctuary, felt like a cage. She called Leo twice a day, her voice bright and false, telling him she was fine, that work was fine, that she had a small bonus. The lie tasted like ash. The $5,000 sat in the same white envelope, tucked under her mattress, feeling less like a gift and more like a shackle. She watched the city through her window, a city that had never felt like hers, and now felt like it was actively rejecting her. She thought about running, taking the money, taking Leo, and just disappearing. But where? Men like Dante Romano didn't just own buildings, they owned the world. Their reach was long. Running would only make her look guilty. Running would be a death sentence. On the 7th day, her phone rang. It was not her cheap, prepaid burner. It was a new phone, delivered in a box by her guard, with one number in it. It rang, and she knew, with a dreadful certainty, who it was. She answered. "You're expected tomorrow," Vescovi's smooth voice said. No greeting, no preamble. 9 in the morning, a car will be at your door. "Expected for what?" Grace asked, her voice hollow. "My job. Your assignment has changed," he said. "Be ready." The line clicked dead. She was not going back to the penthouse. The car the next morning took her far from the city, to a sprawling, walled estate in the rolling hills north of Westbridge. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, surrounded by acres of manicured lawn, dark woods, and high, wrought iron fences. The house itself was a massive, stone and glass structure that seemed to grow out of the hillside. A guard led Grace inside, not but by a uniformed nurse. The interior was modern, filled with art, but it was also clearly a medical facility. There were monitors, machines, and the faint, clean smell of antiseptic in a large, sun-drenched room overlooking a vast garden. Cecilia Romano was sitting up in a hospital bed. She looked smaller, frailer, but her eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and missing nothing. "Miss Moretti," Cecilia said. Her voice was weak, but clear. "You came. They told me to," Grace said, standing awkwardly by the door. Cecilia gave a small, dry laugh, which turned into a cough. She waved a thin hand. "They always do. Please, come in. Don't hover by the door like a frightened sparrow. I've had enough people hovering." Grace slowly approached. The nurse quietly exited, closing the door. "They tell me you are the reason I am here," Cecilia said, her gaze intense. "That you stayed. When any sane person would have run. I didn't know what to do," Grace admitted. "You knew what to do. You pressed on the wound. You did not, as I'm told. Freak out. A medical term, I believe." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I find myself in a difficult position, Grace. My son's men surround me, men who are paid to protect me, and yet, one of them or someone they allowed did this." Her hand moved to her side, a gesture of pain. "I trust no one here," Cecilia said, her voice dropping. "I am surrounded by liars and guards, and I cannot tell which is which. But I trust you." "Me?" Grace was stunned. "You don't know me. I know that you had nothing to gain by helping me, and everything to lose, and you helped anyway." Cecilia shifted, her eyes pleading. "My son has filled this house with men, but I want a companion, someone to sit with me, someone who is not on his payroll, not in that way, someone who does not look at me with either pity or ambition. I asked for you. To be a companion? To read to me, to talk to me, to be a normal person in this mausoleum. They will pay you, of course, handsomely, far more than you scrubbed floors." Grace looked at the elderly woman, at the vulnerability beneath the matriarch's iron will. She saw a lonely, frightened woman, much like herself. "I'm not a nurse," Grace said hesitantly. "I have nurses," Cecilia said with a wave of dismissal. "I need a human being. Will you stay?" And so, Grace stayed. She was given a room, a beautiful, sterile room in a separate wing, but she spent her days with Cecilia. At first, it was awkward. Grace was a maid. She was not used to being waited on, to sitting. But Cecilia was a demanding patient and an easy companion. She had a dry, wicked sense of humor and an insatiable curiosity. Grace read her novels, classics she'd only ever heard of. She read newspapers, Cecilia's sharp commentary cutting through the political jargon, and they talked. Grace found herself, slowly, opening up. She spoke of the small town she'd left, of her love for books, and finally, haltingly, of Leo. She did not share the details of his disability, only that he was her reason, her everything. "Aha!" Cecilia said one afternoon, her eyes sharp as she studied Grace's face. "So that is the steel I saw, the fire. It is not for yourself. It is for him. Love is the most ruthless armor, is it not?" Grace, unused to such blunt, emotional honesty, could only nod. In her time with Cecilia, Grace saw a different side of the Romano family. She saw the loneliness of power, the cage of wealth. Cecilia was a prisoner here, just as much as Grace had been in her apartment, protected and isolated, uncertain of who to trust. And then Dante began to appear. He arrived with no warning. The first time, Grace was reading aloud, her voice soft in the quiet room, and she looked up to find him standing in the doorway. He was just watching them. He wore a suit, as always, his presence sucking the air from the room. Grace's voice faltered, her throat tightening. "Don't stop on my account," he said, his voice low. "Don't be a brute." "Dante," Cecilia snapped. "You are lurking. Come in or leave. You're making the girl nervous." He walked in, his eyes never leaving Grace. He kissed his mother's forehead, a gesture of surprising, casual affection. "Madre." "Figlio," she murmured, patting his hand. "Grace is reading to me. Sit. Be quiet." He took a chair in the corner, and for an hour, he just sat. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't make a call. He just sat, his long legs stretched out, his hands clasped, and he watched. Grace's skin prickled under his gaze. She fumbled her words, her cheeks hot. He wasn't just watching. He was studying. He listened to her voice, watched the way she interacted with his mother, a small, genuine smile on her face. He saw a softness in her that he had not seen in the penthouse or in her apartment. He found himself relaxing. The constant grinding tension in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. When Grace finished the chapter, she closed the book, her hands trembling. "She has a good voice," Dante observed, to his mother, as if Grace were not there. "Clear. She is a good girl," Cecilia said pointedly. "Not one of your usuals. Behave yourself." Dante's lips quivered in a small, dangerous smile. He looked at Grace. "I'm always behaving, Madre." He became a regular fixture. He would appear in the late afternoon, sometimes with a small joke for his mother, his Italian a soft rumble that Grace found herself liking. Despite her fear, he would sit, a silent, powerful shadow, and just be. He watched Grace pour his mother's tea. He watched her adjust Cecilia's pillows, and his eyes, those steel gray, unreadable eyes, began to soften when they rested on her. The coldness was still there, but it was overlaid with a new, unwelcome, and deeply confusing curiosity. About a week into this new, strange routine, Vescovi appeared. "Mr. Romano requests your presence for dinner tonight," he said to Grace. She was in the garden, cutting a rose for Cecilia's room. "A formal thank you for your service to his mother." "I don't need dinner," Grace said, clutching the rose. "I'm being paid." "It was not a request," Vescovi said, and left. Grace was in a panic. She owned nothing but her maid's uniform and her few, threadbare jeans and sweaters. But when she returned to her room, there was a simple, elegant, dark blue dress laid out on her bed. It was modest, sleeveless, and made of silk so soft it felt like water. There were shoes, small black heels, and a note. He insisted, "Don't let him bully you." "See." Grace laughed. A small, shaky sound. Dinner was not in the main hall. It was in a small, private dining room, with a fireplace and a table set for two. Dante was already there, standing by the window. He was not in a suit. He wore dark trousers and a crisp, white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked younger, more dangerous, and utterly breathtaking. He turned as she entered. His eyes swept over her, from her neatly pinned hair down to the simple heels. He didn't smile. He just looked. A long, slow, appreciative appraisal that made her skin feel hot. "Grace," he said, as if the single word were a complete sentence. "Mr. Romano," she said, her voice small. "Dante," he corrected her. "You are in my home. You are sitting with my mother. You will call me Dante." The dinner was an ordeal. The food was incredible, course after course, but Grace could barely swallow. He was a difficult dinner companion. He didn't indulge in small talk. He just asked questions. "Where did you grow up? Why Westbridge? What do you fear?" They were not questions. They were interrogations. But his voice was low, intimate. Grace answered simply. She told him about her town, her hope for a new start, her fear of failing. She did not mention Leo. "My mother likes you," he stated, setting his wine glass down. "She's very kind," Grace said. "She is not," Dante said, a small smile playing on his lips. "She is ruthless. She is sharp. And she is a perfect judge of character. She has not trusted a new person in 20 years. She trusts you." He leaned forward, the candlelight catching the hard planes of his face, his eyes in shadow. "I want you to stay, not as a companion. Not by the hour. I don't understand. Live here, in the house. Be her full-time caregiver. I will pay you an amount that will mean you never have to worry about money again. Your brother. He will be taken care of. His doctors. His care. Whatever he needs. I will handle it." Grace's blood went cold. He knew about Leo, the casual way he said it, the simple, absolute power in his words. He had dug into her life, turned over every rock, found her one. Single vulnerability. She stood up, her chair scraping. "No?" Dante looked surprised. "No? No," she said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. You can't buy me. You can't just take over my brother's life and use him as leverage." "I am not," Dante said, his voice dropping, getting hard. "I am offering protection." "You are offering a cage," Grace shot back, tears stinging her eyes. "You think you can just buy my loyalty, buy my life? I am not for sale. Mr. Romano, I will stay with your mother because she asked me and because I care about her, but I will not be one of your possessions." She turned and fled the room. She didn't run to her room. She ran up a spiral staircase she had seen earlier, until she burst through a door and onto the rooftop. The cold night air hit her like a slap. A welcome. Sharp shock. The city was a distant glow, the stars brilliant. She wrapped her arms around herself, so shaking, not from the cold, but from the raw, violated feeling. She heard the door open behind her. She didn't have to turn. She knew it was him. He walked to the parapet, a few feet away from her, and looked out at the dark hills. He was silent for a long time. "My father," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its arrogance, "was killed on a night like this. Cold, clear, he was not a good man, but he was my father. I was 15. Grace stopped shaking. She turned, looking at his profile. A hard, beautiful silhouette against the night sky. "I found him," he continued, his voice flat, "and I did what I had to do. I have been doing it every day since. In this world, it is not good. Grace, it is blood, and it is loyalty, and it is fear. I do not know any other way." He turned to her. "I did not mean to buy you. I do not know how to ask." Grace's anger dissolved, replaced by a strange, aching pity. "You just ask," she whispered. "You don't investigate. You don't threaten." "I did not threaten," he said, stepping closer. "My brother," she said, her voice hard. "You brought up my brother. That is a threat. It's the only one you have." He looked genuinely confused. "It was an offer. To show you I am serious. To show you I can protect. I don't want to be protected, Dante," she said, the name feeling strange and bold on her tongue. "I want to be seen. I'm just a person, not a pawn in your game." She told him about her father, not a mafia boss, but a quiet, kind man who worked in a factory and died of a sickness they couldn't afford to treat. She told him about her fear, not of men with guns, but of medical bills, of not having enough, of losing the one person she had left. He listened. He was a phenomenal listener, his stillness a vacuum, pulling the words from her. When she was done, her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. He was standing in front of her. "You are not like them," he whispered, his voice rough. "You are clean." He lifted his hand, the same one she had seen covered in his mother's blood, and his thumb, warm and calloused, brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, unsure. "Don't," she whispered. "I have to," he said, his voice a low growl. His other hand, large and firm, settled on her waist, on the thin silk of the dress. It was not a gentle touch. It was a claim. He pulled her, slowly, inevitably, until her body was flush against his. She could feel the hard, muscular wall of his chest, the thud of his heart. Or maybe it was hers. Her hands came up, trembling, and rested on his collar, on the crisp, white shirt. She should push him away. She should run. He lowered his head. His lips, which she had only seen set in a hard, cruel line, were an inch from hers. "Grace," he breathed, and it was a question and a plea and a surrender. And then he kissed her. It was not a soft kiss. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was full of a desperate, pent-up hunger. It was a kiss of a man who had not allowed himself to want, to feel, anything in a very long time. His lips were firm, insistent, moving against hers with a raw, devastating honesty. His hand on her waist tightened, pulling her in, his fingers pressing into her. His other hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her for him. Grace's world tilted. Her fingers, which had been trembling, fisted in his shirt, holding on. She was terrified, but she did not pull away. She kissed him back, tentatively, then with a matching, desperate need that she hadn't known she possessed. He angled his head, deepening the kiss, his tongue brushing her lips, asking for entrance. It was too much, too fast. Grace pulled back, gasping, her lips bruised, her body on fire. She was flushed, hot with a mixture of shame and a desire so potent it terrified her. "I can't," she whispered, her hands pushing against his solid chest. "I can't be this. I can't be used. I won't be discarded." Dante's breathing was heavy. His eyes, when they opened, were dark, molten, the pupils blown wide. He did not let her go. His hands were still on her waist, on her head. He rested his forehead against hers. "Discard you?" he whispered, his voice thick and rough. "Grazia." He stopped, as if the words were foreign, choking him. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I don't intend to discard you." He stepped back, his hands dropping away, leaving her cold and suddenly, strangely, alone. He looked at her swollen lips and her wide, frightened eyes. "Go inside." "Grace," he said, his voice hard, the mask slamming back into place. "It's cold." The next day, she took Cecilia for a drive. The doctor had insisted. Just a short drive, in an armored car with a guard. Grace drove. She needed the air. She needed to feel normal. She was on a quiet country road, the estate just a mile behind them, when she saw the truck in her rearview mirror, a big, black logging truck. It was coming up fast, too fast. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. She sped up. The truck sped up. "Grace, dear, what?" Cecilia started. "Hold on," Grace said, her knuckles white on the wheel. The truck slammed into their bumper. The armored car fishtailed, the sound of screeching metal filling the air. Grace fought the wheel, trying to keep them on the road. The guard in the passenger seat was shouting into a radio. The truck hit them again, harder, pushing them toward the edge of the road, toward a steep, wooded ravine. Grace saw the opening, a narrow dirt access road, and she wrenched the wheel. The car plunged onto the rough track, bouncing, tires spinning, just as the truck thundered past, its horn blaring. Unable to make the turn, she slammed on the brakes, her body thrown against the seatbelt. The car stalled. Silence. She was shaking, violently, her breath coming in sobs. In the back seat, Cecilia was pale, but calm. "Well," the matriarch said, her voice only trembling slightly, "that was bracing." Grace didn't remember the drive back. She didn't remember the other cars, Dante's men, arriving. The next thing she knew, she was wrapped in a blanket, a glass of brandy pressed into her hand, and she was in Dante's personal study. A dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and him. She was sitting on a leather sofa. She was safe. She had saved them. She woke up hours later. The brandy glass was gone. The blanket was tucked around her. She had been asleep, on his sofa, in his room. The door opened, and he was there. His suit was rumpled, his tie was gone. There was a dark, terrifying fury in his eyes, a blackness that made the rage in the penthouse look like a spark. He looked like he had been to hell and back. He saw she was awake. The fury did not lessen, but it shifted. He crossed the room, his movements tight, controlled. He knelt in front of her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a guttural rasp. "No," she whispered. "Cecilia?" "She's fine. Angry. She's fine." He reached out, his hand hovering, as if he was afraid to touch her. His fingers finally brushed a strand of hair from her face. "They tried to kill you," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of a fact so unbelievable, so horrific, it chilled her to the bone. "Not her, you. They knew you were driving. They were trying to silence you." "Me? They won't touch you again," he promised, his voice a low, lethal vow. His hand, which had been so hesitant, was now firm, his fingers cupping her jaw, his eyes boring into hers. "They will not touch you. I am going to find the man who issued this hit. I am going to find him, and I am going to tear his world apart." Grace just stared at him, at the absolute, terrifying certainty in his eyes. He wasn't just a boss, he was a king, and someone who had just declared war on his new Grace didn't know what she was. But she knew. As he knelt before her, his promise hanging in the air like the smell of smoke, she was his. The Romano estate was beautiful, and it was a prison. Grace had been moved from her small, sterile guest room to a palatial suite in the main wing. The suite was connected by a private, secondary hallway to Dante's own. It was a clear, unmistakable message. She was not a guest. She was under his personal protection, which, Grace quickly learned, was indistinguishable from being a captive. Guards, no, not guards, they were sentinels, stood at either end of the hallway, 24 hours a day. Another man, in a suit, was posted by the grand staircase. She was not allowed in the gardens, she was not allowed in the kitchen, she was not allowed to use her own phone, which had been taken, and the new, sleek, black phone he had given her had only 2 contacts, Dante and Cecilia. Her calls to Leo, which had been her only lifeline to her old self, were now forbidden, Dante had assured her, in a flat, non-negotiable tone, that he had handled it. He had sent a private, full-time nurse to her brother's apartment, a specialist in his condition, and had wired an amount of money to an account for his care that made Grace's head spin. He had saved her brother, and in doing so, he had taken her hostage. She lasted 2 days. On the 3rd night, she was waiting for him. She had not eaten, and she was vibrating with a cold, contained fury that had finally burned through her fear. He entered his study, a cavern of dark wood and leather, at 2 a.m, looking exhausted. He had been gone since the attack, his movements a mystery, his absence a crushing weight. He stopped when he saw her. She was standing by the cold fireplace, a small, defiant figure in the borrowed silk pajamas that had been laid out for her. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice rough. He loosened his tie, his eyes dark with a weariness that went bone deep. "You should be honest," she shot back. His eyes narrowed. He was not used to being challenged, least of all by her. "This isn't protection, Dante." The name felt like a weapon on her tongue. "This is a cage. You put me in a cage." "I'm keeping you alive," he said, his voice dropping, the familiar, dangerous rumble returning. He walked to the bar and poured a measure of whiskey. He did not offer her one. "Alive?" she said, her voice rising, high and sharp. "What kind of life? I can't walk. I can't breathe. I can't call my brother. You don't just handle my brother. Dante, you don't get to take him from me." "I am ensuring his safety," he said, turning his knuckles white around the glass. "Something you can no longer do." The words were a slap, a calculated, cruel strike. "Because of you," she cried, the tears she had refused to shed finally breaking free. "This is because of you. Before I met you, I had a life. It was hard, and I was poor, but it was mine. Now I'm what? I'm a thing. I'm a possession you lock up in a pretty room so no one breaks it. I'm not a person to you, I'm just a target." He crossed the room in 2 long, silent strides. He did not grab her, as she expected. He did not tower over her. He just stood. His face a mask of something she couldn't read, not anger, but a deep, profound pain. "A target," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You think you are the target." He was so close. She could feel the heat rolling off him, the scent of whiskey and clean, expensive wool. "I am the target, Grace," he said, his voice a raw, jagged edge. "I have always been the target. You are just the wound, the place they know to press." He unbuttoned the cuff of his white shirt, his movements precise. He pushed the sleeve up his forearm, past the absurdly expensive watch, and showed her a scar, pale and puckered, ran from his wrist to his elbow, a long, jagged line. But it was not the only one. His other hand went to his ribs, his hand tracing a spot on his side. "This," he said, tapping his side, "was from a man I called Uncle, who thought I was not ready to lead after my father died. This," he touched his forearm, "was from a shipment I refused to move. This," he turned his head, pointing to a small silver scar just behind his ear, "was from a traitor who ate at my table the night before." He looked at her, his eyes stripped of all pretense, all power. He was not the boss. He was a man made of scars. This is the world, Grace. This is life. It is not pretty. It is not clean, and it is the only one I have. He dropped his sleeve, his voice softening. "I am not protecting you from the world. I am protecting you from mine. I am caging you. Yes, I am. Because the man who did this, the man who tried to kill you, who attacked my mother, he is not a stranger. He is one of us. He is my blood." Grace's anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, dreadful understanding. She had seen him as a monster, a king, a savior. She had never seen him as this, trapped. "He's in the family?" she whispered. "He is," Dante said, his face twisting. "And I do not know who. So until I do, I trust no one, not my guards, not my captains." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it was a physical touch. "Only you, and my mother. You are the only two people in this entire damned world I know are not lying to me." The confession hung in the air, more intimate than the kiss on the rooftop, more devastating than his anger. Grace's tears were gone. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a new, aching wave of emotion. She put her hand on his chest, on the solid, warm wall of his body. She could feel his heart, a steady, powerful beat beneath her palm. "I am so tired," she whispered, the words a raw admission. "I am just so tired of being afraid." His eyes closed, his body tensing at her touch. His hand came up and covered hers, pressing it flat against his heart. "Grazia," he breathed, his voice thick. This was her surrender. This was her choice. She rose up on her toes, her other hand coming up to cup his jaw, the rough stubble scraping her palm. "Then don't let me be," she said. He didn't hesitate. His mouth came down on hers, not with the questioning hunger of the rooftop, but with a desperate, profound, and absolute certainty. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of necessity. He kissed her like he was drowning. His hand left her chest, sliding down her back, fingers splayed wide over the silk, gripping her at the base of her spine. He pulled her flush against him, lifting her, molding her body to his. There was no space, no air, no thought. Grace's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, her mouth opening under his. It was a raw, breathless, desperate exchange. It was not gentle. It was a collision. He tasted whiskey and power and a loneliness so deep it mirrored her own. He backed her up, his mouth never leaving hers, until her legs hit the edge of the large, leather sofa. They stumbled, not a graceful fall, but a collapse. He fell with her, half over her, his weight a solid, comforting anchor. They landed on the soft leather, a tangle of limbs and a breathless, desperate passion. He was on his side, his arm braced, his leg thrown over hers, pinning her. He broke the kiss, his breathing harsh, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide, a storm of emotion she could not, and did not want to, read. "Grace," he said, his voice a wreck. She was trembling. Her body was alive in a way she had never known. She was still clothed, he was still clothed, but she had never felt so utterly, completely bare. She was terrified, and she was, for the first time, not afraid. "I'm here," she whispered, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. I'm not going anywhere." He just held her, his body trembling with a force he was barely containing. He pressed his face into the curve of her neck, his breath hot against her skin, and she just held him, her hands stroking his hair, her own heart hammering against his. They lay there, on his sofa, in the fortress, in the middle of the night, two broken, lonely people clinging to each other as the world outside prepared for war. Trust, in Dante's world, was not given. It was forged in blood and betrayal, and at that moment, it was sealed. He finally pulled back. Though he did not let her go, he lay beside her, pulling her close, her back against his chest. "It's my cousin," he said into the darkness, his voice flat. "Antonio, my father's nephew. He runs the legitimate side of the business, the shipping, the property. He's always been ambitious, always greasy." Grace lay still, listening. "My mother," Dante continued, his hand idly stroking her arm, "is the only thing standing between him and a seat on the council. She controls the family trust. If she dies, he believes that power reverts to the next of kin. He thinks I am too violent, too old school. He wants to modernize, which means drugs, things I have forbidden. He tried to have her killed, and when you survived, he tried to kill you, to silence you, and to send me a message that I cannot protect what is mine." "How do you know it's him?" Grace asked, her voice small. "I don't, not for certain, not with proof." His arm tightened. "In my world, you cannot move on a suspicion. You must be 100%. To move against your own blood and be wrong is the end. He's careful. He has layers. He would not order the hit himself. He would use someone." Grace thought back, her mind racing, replaying the last few weeks. The staff, they're afraid of him. Everyone is. "No," Grace said, sitting up. He let her. "They're afraid of you, Dante, but they respect Antonio. He's charming. He sends gifts." She thought of the kitchens. Alara, the head housekeeper. She talks about him. And there's a guard, Reeve. He has dead eyes. Dante went very still. "Reeve? One of my men?" "He's new," Grace said, the pieces clicking. "He was on duty at the house the day of the attack on the road, but he wasn't in the car. He was supposed to be. He called in sick. I heard the other men talking, and Alara, she's always watching your mother, not with care, with assessment, like she's waiting." Dante was off the sofa in an instant. He was a different man. The lover was gone, and the boss was back. He was pacing, his mind clearly working, a general positioning his troops. Alara and Reeve, he said to himself. A way in, a connection. Before he could say more, a high, piercing, shrill alarm blared through the house. Not a fire alarm, a medical one. Grace's blood went cold. "Cecilia?" They ran. They didn't wait for the guards, who were already pounding down the hall. Dante was there first, bursting into his mother's room. She was in the bed, pale, her eyes closed. The machines beside her were screaming. The private nurse was performing chest compressions. Cecilia was not breathing. "She crashed," the nurse yelled, not stopping. "Her heart, it's a setback, the trauma, the infection." Dante just stood there, frozen. His face was white, a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was seeing it, the one thing he couldn't control, the one person he couldn't protect. He was losing her. "Dante!" the nurse shouted. "The bag! Pump the bag!" He didn't move. He was paralyzed. Grace flew past him. She grabbed the oxygen bag and mask, placing it over Cecilia's mouth. Her hands, so used to trembling, now perfectly steady. "Breathe, Cecilia," she whispered. "Breathe. You are not leaving. I'm not letting you." She looked at the nurse. "I'm pumping. Keep going. Dante, get out of the way." The doctor, who had been sleeping in the next room, yelled as he ran in, pushing Dante bodily aside. "Get me a line, now!" Dante stumbled back, hitting the wall. He was not a boss. He was not a king. He was just a son, watching his mother die. The medical team worked, a flurry of efficient, desperate motion. Grace was pushed aside. She stumbled back and found herself next to Dante. He was vibrating. His body was shaking with a grief so violent, so silent, it was terrifying. He turned, not seeing her, not seeing anything, and he slammed his fist into the solid plaster wall. It was not a sound of anger. It was a sound of absolute, final despair. A crack spiderwebbed from his knuckles. The guards in the hallway flinched. The nurse didn't look up. Dante let out a sound, a low, guttural roar, like a bull that had been struck. He raised his fist again. Before he could, Grace grabbed him. She threw her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his back, holding on with all her meager strength. "No," she whispered, her voice fierce. "No, you do not. You do not break. Not now. I have you." He froze. His arm, raised, slowly lowered. He was shaking, his broad shoulders heaving. He turned, his face a ruin, and he didn't hold her. He clutched her, his arms wrapped around her like steel bands, his face burying in her hair, and he broke. He didn't sob. He just shattered. His body went limp, his weight falling onto her, and he held her, his knuckles bleeding, his body shaking. And he just held on. Grace held him back, her small body an anchor for his massive, breaking grief. "She's back," the doctor said, his voice breathless. "We have a rhythm. It's weak, but it's back." Dante didn't let go. He couldn't. Grace just held him, long after his shaking had stopped, his composure slowly, painfully stitching itself back together. Later. She watched him. Cecilia was stable, but the brush with death had changed something. Grace sat in the hallway, watching Dante through the open door of his study. He was on the phone. The man who had broken her arms was gone. His hand was bandaged. His voice was cold, dead. "I want Antonio's movements. Every minute. I want Reeve. Find him. I don't care where he is. I want him. And the woman, Ilara. Take her. Take them both." He was giving orders. He was unleashing the full, terrifying force of his power. Grace watched him, and a new, cold fear crept into her heart. She had held him. She had seen him at his weakest. He had trusted her. But she knew, in this world, weakness was a death sentence. What if that's all she was to him? A temporary comfort, a momentary weakness in his armor. What happens when he doesn't need to be held anymore? Cecilia's setback had stabilized, but the house remained submerged in a new, suffocating tension. Dante was a ghost, a presence felt rather than seen. His voice a low, lethal hum on the phone. His study door perpetually closed. He was hunting, and his absence left Grace in a state of suspended animation. She was safe, she was caged, and she was waiting. She spent her days with Cecilia. The matriarch was weaker, her body frail, but her eyes had a new, sharpened focus. The brush with death had stripped away her pleasantries, leaving only a core of pure, undiluted will. She and Grace no longer spoke of books or gardens. They spoke in a quiet, coded language, their bond forged in the shared terror of that night. Grace was in Cecilia's room, changing the water in a vase, when Cecilia's hand, thin and papery, gripped her wrist. "He's not telling me," Cecilia whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "He's protecting you, Cecilia." "Protection," Cecilia scoffed, a weak, brittle sound. "Protection is for the weak. I want the truth. He's hunting Antonio." Grace just nodded, her throat tight. "My jewelry box," Cecilia said, her eyes flickering to the high, dark wood dresser. "The old one, my silver rosary. I want it." Grace, grateful for a task, crossed the room. The box was heavy, inlaid with mother of pearl. She opened the lid. It was a tangle of old, heavy gold chains, brooches, and the scent of rosewater and dust. Tucked in the corner was a small, silver rosary, and beneath it, something else. A piece of paper. Not just paper, it was a corner of a linen napkin, folded thick. It was stiff, and it was stained a dark, rusty brown. Grace's blood ran cold. She knew, with absolute certainty, what it was. It was blood. She looked at Cecilia. The old woman's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. She was pretending to sleep, with trembling fingers. Grace unfolded the napkin. It was from the day of the first attack. The day she had found Cecilia in the penthouse. Cecilia had not just been a victim. She had been a witness. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, written in the very blood she had been losing. It was 2 names, and a few words. Antonio. Reeve. The door. Traitors. Grace's breath hitched. This was it. This was the proof Dante needed. This was the ironclad certainty he had been waiting for. She closed her hand around the note, the stiffened linen crackling. She had to find him. Now. She pocketed the note, her heart a trip hammer against her ribs. She kissed Cecilia's forehead. "I'll be right back." she whispered. She stepped out of the bedroom. The two sentinels, Dante's most trusted men, were at the end of the hall. She started toward them, to ask them to get Dante. A door opened to her left, a service closet. "Miss Moretti!" Grace froze. It was not one of Dante's men. It was Reeve. His eyes were just as she remembered, flat, dead, empty. He was in his guard's uniform, but he was not on duty. He should not have been there. He was sick, the traitor, and he was in the house. "Dante," she started to say, her voice coming out as a choked squeak. He was on her before she could take a breath. It was not a struggle. It was a silent, brutal, and efficient act. His hand, smelling of harsh soap, clamped over her mouth and nose. She saw the glint of a syringe in his other hand. She felt a sharp, cold prick in her neck, and the world dissolved. She woke to the smell of salt and old, rotting fish. Her head was throbbing, a deep, sickening pulse that matched the thrum of a distant engine. She was on a concrete floor, cold and damp seeping through her clothes. She tried to move, and her hands and feet met the bite of thick, plastic zip ties. She was bound to a metal chair. A single bare bulb hung from a high, raftered ceiling, illuminating a small circle of light in a vast, dark space. A warehouse. She could hear the creak of a boat against a dock, the mournful cry of a foghorn. "You're a problem." Reeves stepped out of the shadows. He was smoking, the red cherry of his cigarette glowing in the dark. He looked calm. "You're just a nothing," he said, walking a slow circle around her. "Just a maid. And now, you're in the center of it all. He's hunting me. The boss. Because of you." "Dante knows," Grace choked out, her throat raw from the drug. "He knows it's you. He's coming." Reeve laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He's coming for Alara. He's tearing apart the kitchen staff. He doesn't know about me. Not for certain. But Antonio doesn't like loose ends. And you, little maid, are the biggest loose end of all." He stopped in front of her. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything you know, everything you found, everything you told him, and then you're going to disappear. A tragic accident, body in the harbor. He'll be sad for a week, and then he'll find a new, pretty toy." "I don't know anything," Grace whispered, tears of terror and rage stinging her eyes. "Liar!" His open hand cracked across her face. The sound was flat, ugly, echoing in the vast space. Her head snapped back, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. Stars exploded behind her eyes. "Let's try again," Reeves said, his voice still bored. "What did you find?" Grace lifted her head, the world tilting. She thought of Dante, of his hand on her cheek, of him breaking in her arms. She thought of Cecilia, her small, frail body, her iron will. "Go to hell," Grace spat, the blood from her lips spraying his face. He didn't move for a second, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he wiped the spittle from his cheek. He was not angry. He was done. "Fine," he said, and pulled a gun from the waistband of his trousers. "We'll do this the hard way." At the estate, Cecilia had woken from her feigned sleep. She had waited 10 minutes, then 15. She knew. She hit the panic button beside her bed, the one that went straight to Dante's personal phone. He was in a darkened sub-basement of the estate, his hands bandaged, his face a mask of cold fury. Alara, the housekeeper, was sobbing in a chair. She had just given him Reeves' name. His phone buzzed. It was his mother. "She's gone," Cecilia said, her voice a steel wire. "Reeve. He was in the hall. He took her. He was here. He took Grace." Dante's blood did not run cold. It turned to ice. He had been looking for a snake in the grass, and it had been in his mother's hallway. "Lock the doors," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "No one in, no one out." He hung up. He looked at his men. "Reeve. He has her. Antonio's dockside warehouse. The old fish market. Now." Dante didn't wait for his men. He was in his car, a black, armored beast, roaring down the private road before his guards had even opened their doors. He was not a boss. He was not a man. He was a weapon. Aimed. The warehouse was silent when he arrived. He did not go in the front. He moved like a shadow, his men fanning out behind him, a silent, dark tide. He knew this building. He owned it. He heard Reeves' voice, lazy, arrogant. "One last chance. Talk." And he heard Grace's reply, small but unbroken. "No." Dante kicked the steel side door. It didn't budge. He fired 2 rounds from his heavy-caliber pistol into the lock, and the door screamed open. He was inside. The scene was a tableau. Grace, tied, bloody. Reeve, his gun raised, his face a mask of shock. There were 2 other men, shadows in the back, turning. It was over in 3 seconds. Reeve fired, a wild, panicked shot that pinged off a steel girder. Dante did not fire wildly. He was calm. He was precise. He fired twice. 2 thudding, heavy sounds. Reeves' men dropped without a sound. Reeves stared, his gun hand lowering, his eyes wide. He looked down at his own chest, where a dark, wet stain was spreading. He had not even seen Dante aim. Dante walked forward, his gun still raised, his eyes locked on Reeve. He did not look at Grace. Not yet. He could not. Reeves sank to his knees, his gun clattering on the concrete. He looked up at Dante, his face a mask of confusion. He paid me." Dante shot him again, a single, final punctuation. The sound was deafening in the silence. He stood over the body for a long, cold second, and then, as if a switch had been thrown, the ice shattered. He dropped his gun. "Grace!" He ran to her, fumbling with the knife from his ankle sheath, his hands, the hands of a surgeon and a killer, now clumsy and shaking. He sliced through the thick, plastic ties, her body, freed, slumped forward. He caught her, pulling her from the chair and onto his knees, onto the cold, filthy concrete. She was so light, so small. Her face was a ruin of bruises, her lips split, her eyes swollen. She was barely conscious. "I didn't," she whispered, her hands weakly clutching the front of his suit jacket. "I didn't tell him. The note. I have the note." "I know," Dante said, his voice a broken, guttural thing he didn't recognize. He pulled her flush against him, his hand tangling in her hair, his other arm crushing her to his chest. He was trying to push her into him, to hide her, to absorb her. "I know, Grazia, I know." He lifted her. He carried her out of the warehouse, past his men, who were now securing the scene, their faces averted. They knew not to look. He carried her into the cold night air, the foghorn crying, and he didn't put her in the car. He just stood, holding her, his face buried in her hair, his multi-$1,000 suit soaked in her blood and his. She was fading, her consciousness slipping. She felt his lips against her temple. She heard his voice. A raw, ragged promise, a vow spoken to her, to the night, to God. "I came for you. I always will." She woke up, and the world was soft. She was floating, not in the cold harbor, but in a sea of Egyptian cotton and down. The scent was clean, a faint, masculine smell of sandalwood and him. She was in his bed. The room was dark, the heavy curtains drawn, but a sliver of light showed it was day or night. She had no idea. She was clean. Her wounds had been treated, small, stinging patches on her face. She was wearing a t-shirt, a ridiculously large, soft, gray t-shirt that smelled like him. A sound, a shift. Dante was in the armchair beside the bed. He had not slept. He had not moved. His jacket was gone, his tie pulled loose, his sleeves rolled up, revealing his bandaged knuckles. His face was covered in a dark, rough stubble. His eyes were red, exhausted and fixed, unblinking. "On her? Grace," he breathed. The word was not a name, it was a prayer. He was at the bedside in an instant, his large, warm hand covering hers. He didn't speak, he just held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles, as if to reassure himself she was real. "How long?" she whispered. Her voice was a croak. 2 days, he said, his voice rough. "You the drug, the shock, you've been sleeping." She saw the raw, exposed terror in his eyes. The man who had broken, the man who had killed him, was gone. This was someone else, a man terrified. "He didn't get the note," she whispered, the memory returning. "I have it," Dante said. "It's safe." She just looked at him, and the tears, the ones she had refused to shed in the warehouse, now came silent. Hot tears of relief and pain. "I didn't know." he said, his voice thick, his head bowing, his forehead resting on their joined hands. "I've lost people. It is the cost. It is part of life. But this sitting here waiting—" He lifted his head, his steel-gray eyes raw with a vulnerability she had only glimpsed. I did not know someone could matter this much." It was the most honest, devastating confession she had ever heard. It was not, "I love you." It was, "You are my life." She pulled her hand from his, and his face, for a second, fell, as if he thought she was rejecting him. But she just moved, shifting in the massive bed, making room. He understood. He didn't get on top of the covers. He toed off his shoes and slid into the bed, fully clothed, and pulled her to him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of survival. He kissed her temple, his lips brushing the bruised skin. He kissed her swollen cheek. He kissed her split lip, a touch so gentle, so full of apology. It made her cry harder. And then he just held her. He wrapped his body around hers, his arm a heavy, protective bar over her waist, his face buried in her hair, and he just held. They slept, entangled, his large, scarred body shielding hers, a silent, unmoving sentinel in the dark. The confrontation came a week later. Grace was healed. The bruises faded to yellow. Her strength returned. Dante had not let her out of his sight. He had summoned Antonio to the study. Antonio entered, smiling, his suit perfect, his charm weaponized. "Dante, cousin, I arrived as soon as I heard." "Such chaos, Reeve? Who would have thought? A traitor in our midst. Thank God you—" He stopped. Grace was there, sitting on the sofa, her face pale but her spine rigid. Dante was behind his desk, his face unreadable. "You are a sloppy man." "Antonio," Dante said, his voice quiet. Antonio's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean. I came to offer my condolences to your maid." "You mean the woman you tried to have murdered?" Dante said. Antonio laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Dante, this is madness. You have been under a great deal of stress. You have no proof. Reeve is dead. The housekeeper is a half-wit. You have nothing?" "He has this," a new voice said. The study doors opened. Cecilia Romano entered, sitting upright in her wheelchair. She was dressed, her hair perfect, her eyes like chips of blue ice. Antonio went white. Aunt Cecilia, you are well." "I am," Cecilia said, her voice carrying across the room. "No thanks to you, you greedy, impatient little boy. If you, Dante, has poisoned you—" "No," Cecilia said. "You did." Dante stood up. He walked around the desk. He was not holding a gun. He was holding a small, blood-stained piece of folded napkin. He dropped it on the desk in front of Antonio. Antonio stared at it, his face a mask of horror. He knew. "I was awake," Cecilia said, her voice cold, "when your animal came for me. I was not strong enough to fight him, but I was strong enough to write. I knew my son. I knew my son would find it." Antonio looked from the note to Dante, his arrogance shattering, revealing the terrified, cornered rat beneath. "Dante, cousin, please. It was just business. She's old. She was in the way. It was for the family. For progress." Dante was very, very still. He looked at Grace. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at Antonio. "Get out," he whispered. Antonio blinked. "What?" "You are no longer Romano," Dante said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "You have no name. You have no money. You have no power. You have no protection. Every asset, every building, every ship, it is all mine. You will leave this house, and you will leave this city. You have 1 hour. If I ever see your face, or hear your name, or even hear a rumor of you, in this country again, I will not exile you." Antonio's face crumpled. "You can't. I am your blood. Get out." Antonio stared at the three of them, the unmovable boss, the unbreakable maid, the indestructible matriarch. He was ruined. He turned, and he ran. Dante walked to the window, watching the man flee. He let out a long breath, his first, it seemed, in weeks. He turned, his eyes found Grace. He held out his hand. She stood, and she walked to him, and she took it. The exile of Antonio Romano was not a quiet affair. It was a message. Dante, in the days that followed, moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying. He was not just a boss, he was a king, and he was cleaning his court. He called a meeting of his captains, his lieutenants, his entire organization. It was held in the grand, echoing ballroom of a downtown hotel he owned, the crystal chandeliers dark. He stood on a low stage, not in a suit, but in the simple, dark trousers and white shirt that had become his new armor. Grace was not there, but his mother was. Wheeled to the side of the stage, a silent, iron-willed testament. Dante did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply spoke. His voice low and amplified, carrying to every corner of the room. He informed them of the betrayal. He informed them of the attack on his mother, the living heart of the family. He told them of the attempt on the life of... He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. A civilian under my personal protection. He announced the changes. The old ways were done. The legitimate businesses that Antonio had used to mask his treachery were being reformed, restructured, and brought under Dante's direct, unyielding control. Loyalty would no longer be assumed. It would be earned, and it would be rewarded. But disloyalty, he did not need to finish the sentence. The brutal, final fate of Reeve and the sudden, silent disappearance of a dozen other associates had already spoken for him. He was tightening his grip, not with fear, but with a new, cold, and absolute authority. He ended the speech by honoring his mother, his hand gesturing to Cecilia. The room, filled with the hardest men in the city, erupted in an explosion of applause, a roar of fealty. Not for the son, but for the matriarch who had survived. Dante Romano was fully and truly in control. But Grace was not. She was healing. The bruises had faded, the cut on her lip a faint pink line, but the trauma was a deeper, more stubborn wound. She would wake up. Not in his bed where he had left her, but in her own suite, her heart hammering, the smell of salt and fish in her nose. She would find herself staring at the guards in the hall, her stomach clenching, her hands trembling. Was he a new man, or the same as Reeve? She was afraid. She was afraid to stay, terrified of this world of casual violence, a world where a wrong look or a whispered word could get you killed, a world where the man she cared about was the one who ordered those deaths. But she was more afraid to leave. The thought of returning to her old life, to the gray, grinding poverty, to the constant, dull ache of fear for Leo that was one terror. But the new, sharper terror was the thought of leaving him, of never again feeling his hand on her face, of never seeing that rare, unguarded crack in his armor. The world he had shown her was dark, but he was the only light in it. She was trapped between two impossible futures. He found her on the balcony of her suite, staring out at the woods, her arms wrapped around herself. He had not touched her, not in the intimate way of that night on the sofa, since she had woken. He had been a perfect gentleman, attentive, protective, and devastatingly distant. He was giving her space. He was giving her a choice. He's safe, Grace, he said, his voice quiet. She turned. He was holding his phone. The screen lit. It was a video. Leo. He was sitting up in a new, high-tech bed in her old apartment. He was laughing. A bright, clear-eyed woman, the nurse, was sitting beside him, playing a card game. He looked healthy. The background of the apartment was changed. It was clean, freshly painted, the refrigerator new. I told you, Dante said, stepping onto the balcony with her. He's taken care of. This is a gilded cage, Grace whispered, turning back to the woods. For both of us. I know, he said, standing beside her, not touching, but it is the only cage I can offer. He took a breath. I do not want you to be my mother's companion, Grace. I do not want you to be a guest. I do not want to pay you. Her heart stuttered. This was it. The end. I want you to live with me, Tim, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. In my home, in my room, in my life, not as a maid, not as a protected asset. He finally turned, his body angled toward hers. As my partner, as for me, it was a proposal, not of marriage, but of possession, of partnership. It was everything she had feared, and everything she had, in her darkest, most secret heart, begun to want. She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous, scarred man who had broken and killed for her, who had, in his own brutal way, saved her. She was overwhelmed. It was too much. The violence, the power, the all-consuming him. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice raw. "Dante, I can't breathe here. I'm not like you. I'm not strong enough for this." "You," he said, his voice fierce, his hand finally reaching out, his fingers gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You, Grace Moretti, are the strongest person I have ever known. You faced me in that penthouse. You faced Reeve. You held me when I was breaking. Do not ever tell me you are not strong." He let her go, his hand dropping. "I will not force you. The choice is yours. You can leave. I will give you enough money and you and Leo will be safe. You will never have to see me again, or you can stay." He left her. He just walked away, leaving her on the balcony with the weight of that impossible choice. She went to see Cecilia. She found the matriarch in the sunroom, her wheelchair angled toward the light. "He's asked you," Cecilia said. It was not a question. Grace just nodded, her throat tight. "And you are afraid," Cecilia stated. "You are afraid of what he is. You are afraid he will consume you, that you will become just his woman. A shadow." "Yes," Grace whispered. Cecilia turned her chair, her eyes still sharp, still intelligent, softened. "My son," she said, her voice quiet, "was a machine. From the day his father died, he was an engine of vengeance and duty. He was cold, he was hard, he was effective, he was a good boss, but he was a terrible son. He was empty." She reached out her thin, veined hand. Grace took it. "And then you came," Cecilia said, her thumb stroking Grace's knuckles. "You, the little maid, covered in blood, who did not run, you who were terrified but did not break. You reminded him what it was to fear losing something. He's more of a man in the last 2 months than he has been in the last 20 years. She gripped Grace's hand. "Do not mistake his power for his heart, child. He's a brute. But he is a brute who is, for the first time, learning to be gentle. He respects you. More than that, he sees you. His world will try to change you. But I think, Grace Moretti, you are the one who will change it." Grace looked at this woman, who had been shot, betrayed, and had nearly died, and saw only strength. "I respect you, Grace," Cecilia said, "for your courage, for your honesty. My son, he had lost both, until he found you." Grace's choice was made. It was not a choice between fear and safety. It was a choice between an empty life, and one that was terrifyingly full. She went to his study. She did not knock. He was behind his desk, a mountain of paperwork in front of him, the burdens of his empire. He looked up, his face guarded, his eyes prepared for her rejection. She walked across the vast expanse of carpet until she was standing in front of the desk. "You don't get to just buy my brother and handle my life and then expect me to just be grateful," she said, her voice shaking but strong. He just watched her, his face a mask. I am not staying here because you've protected me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not staying because you've saved us. I'm not afraid of being poor again." "Then why stay?" he asked, his voice a low, guarded rumble. "Because," she said, her hands flat on his desk, leaning toward him, "you are a brute, and you are arrogant, and you are the most terrifying man I have ever met." A shadow crossed his face. "And I think," she said, her voice dropping, "I am falling in love with you." The mask shattered, the raw, vulnerable man she had seen, the man who had knelt in his mother's blood, the man who had broken in her arms. He was there. His eyes, his beautiful, steel-gray eyes, widened, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock and hope crossed his face. He was on his feet in an instant, rounding the desk. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her. "Say it again," he whispered, his voice wrecked. "I can't," she whispered, her cheeks hot. "But I will move on. I will stay. Not for protection. Not as your partner." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. For love. He did not have words. He, the man who commanded armies, who ruled a city, was speechless. He simply raised his hand, his large, calloused, scarred hand, and he touched her face. He cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek, and he just looked. He looked at her like she was a miracle. "Grazia," he breathed, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the rooftop. It was not the brutal, claiming kiss of the sofa. It was a promise. It was slow. It was reverent. His lips, which had been so hard, were now imposlagrono, soft, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his solid chest, her fingers curling into his shirt. He pulled back, his eyes dark, molten. "Then you will stay with me," he said. "I will," she said. That night was different. He did not leave her in her suite. He led her, by the hand, to his room, a vast masculine space of dark woods, gray linens, and a wall of glass overlooking the dark estate. The tension, the need that had been simmering between them for weeks and was a palpable thing in the room. It was not fear, it was anticipation. He stood by the window, watching her. He was nervous, the master of the city, nervous. I have not," he started, his voice rough. "I have not been with a good woman, Grace. I do not know how to be gentle." "You were gentle," she said, her voice a whisper. "When you kissed my lip." She walked to him. She, the maid, she, the nothing girl. She stood in front of him, and she was, for the first time, his equal. She reached up, her small, steady hands, and she undid the buttons of his shirt. He stood, perfectly still, his body thrumming under her touch, his eyes locked on hers. His shirt fell open. She splayed her hands on his chest, on the warm, hard, scarred skin. You are not afraid of me," he whispered, his voice thick with wonder. "No," she said, her own voice trembling. "Not tonight." His hands, those large, rough hands, came up to her. He did not grab. He did not take it. He asked. His hands rested on her waist, his thumbs drawing small, electric circles on her hips. "Grace," he breathed, and then there were no more words. There was only a slow, inevitable, and profound coming together. His mouth on hers, slow and deep, and full of the emotion he could not speak. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, sliding down her back, his touch reverent, wondrous. Her clothes disappeared. They were gone, and they were skin to skin, heart to heart. It was not the brutal, fast passion of a dark world. It was a discovery. They fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises. He held himself above her, his body a masterpiece of hard, scarred muscle. His face was open, vulnerable, his eyes only for her. "You are beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough. "You are mine." "I am," she breathed, and she pulled him down. It was a joining. It was a promise. It was tender. It was deep. It was slow hands and long kisses and whispered words of a future. It was the complete, total, and absolute surrender of two broken souls, finding their whole in each other. It was perfect. Later, they lay, tangled in the gray sheets, the moonlight streaming in, bathing them in silver. Her head was on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart, his arm a heavy, protective bar over her. "I will stay," she whispered into the darkness, her voice muffled against his skin. He tensed, ready for the butt. "But I will not be one of your possessions. Dante," she lifted her head, looking him in the eyes, her own gaze fierce. "I will not be hidden. I will not be silent. I have to be me. I have to still be Grace, independent, strong, unafraid." He looked at her, and the smile was not his wolfish, arrogant smile. It was something new. It was true. He nodded, his hand coming up to cup her face. "Then he said, his voice a deep, absolute vow, "will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever makes you afraid again." The final scenes were not in the dark. Stone Fortress. He took her, and Cecilia, to a new place. A sprawling, white, modern house, not in the hills, but on the edge of a vast, crystal-clear lake. It was open, it was full of light, it was peaceful. "For us," he said, as they stood on the dock, the water lapping at the shore. For my mother, for safety, a new start. Grace looked at him, at this impossible man who had changed his entire world for her. The story closes on her, standing in the bright afternoon sunlight, the wind from the lake catching her hair. She's not in a maid's uniform. She's just Grace. She's standing beside him, his hand, his large, scarred hand held loosely but firmly in hers. The once powerless maid now holds the heart of the most feared man in the city, and stronger than ever. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope you enjoyed this journey of danger and love. We would love to hear from you. Please comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. If you love stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. And please, share your thoughts in English. What did you think of Grace and Dante's story? We can't wait to read your comments.